The planet is heating up.
The oceans are becoming filled with plastic.
Change starts now. Change starts now.
We're on a countdown
To zero waste. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is the Zero Waste Countdown Podcast. Here's your host, Laura Nash.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ZWC. Today, we're speaking with Ed Kolodziej. He's the Associate Professor at the University of Washington in Tacoma at the Center for Urban Waters. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a really nice invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Well, what a wild thing we've just discovered. I couldn't believe it. So basically, you were part of a study that has found that there are parts of car tires that are actually leading to reduction of a lot of wild salmon right in urban areas. So we're going to talk all about that study and find out some information on it. And let's start with your job and how are you involved with this study?
Yeah, so I have been up here at the University of Washington in both Tacoma and Seattle campuses for about 6 years now. And what I really do for my day job is water quality analysis. I go out in the environment and I basically try to track chemicals around the environment, especially chemicals that are bad for fish. That's kind of been a common theme to the work I've done. And I got here to UW in 2014, and everybody was talking about stormwater, especially this situation where it seemed like fall rainstorms were killing coho salmon from something in the stormwater, and they didn't know what was causing it, right? It was thought to be a water quality problem, but they didn't know why. So that was just a really interesting, intellectually engaging, and important problem that definitely got my attention.
Mm-hmm. And what's really cool is that you guys out there identified the problem. You had no idea, I don't think, what it was, and you actually found it, right? Was anyone guessing that it could have been tires, or was this a surprise?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I'd like to say about that is that people have been working on this for like more than 20 years now. And in fact, the first observations of coho dying from like stormwater came in the 1980s up in Bellingham, Washington, right on the Canada-US border. And so it's clear like people have been seeing for a long time that there was an issue. And then in the 90s, Seattle put money toward urban creek restorations where they wanted salmon to come back. And people started to notice that coho salmon came back, but when it rained, they died. And so there was pretty much been a really big and really good team of researchers working on this for like 20 years now. And they documented that it was real, that it was happening every year, that it happened in a whole bunch of watersheds. This wasn't just one place. It was like multiple creeks. And they figured out, over time, it wasn't like pathogens or dissolved oxygen or ammonia, all these things you might expect could kill fish. And so, it's thought to be just something else. And so I came to UW and we just kind of turned on our instrument and started trying to measure chemicals in water when these events happened. And over 6 years of work, that just kept leading us closer and closer to like tire rubber chemicals. And so that's really how we got to like the tire part of this.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I had no idea that it was going on for so long. Like that's okay. So the 80s, yeah. So that's like 40 years of this being a problem. So not very good. So let's go back to the declining numbers of salmon. So what kind of numbers are you seeing decline? Like, is this going to wipe out the population? And I think it's only coho, right? Is it other forms of salmon that this has been a problem with?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is coho salmon definitely seems to be the most sensitive species of salmon with respect to this particular stormwater, urban runoff problem. For example, chum salmon come back sometimes at the same time as coho salmon, so that there's times when both populations of salmon are in these creeks and rivers, and it rains and the coho salmon die and the chum salmon don't. So this is definitely a case where like not all species respond to water quality problems or chemical pollution the same way. And so we definitely see that here. with respect to its impact on populations, in general, organisms, especially aquatic organisms, don't do well when there's a lot of people around, right? Like, this is a global pattern. It's sometimes called like urban stream syndrome. The more people that are around, the more organisms seem to disappear from the habitats near us. And wrapping back to the Coho salmon, this water quality issue, some of the work done by the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the National Marine Fisheries Service, they did some population modeling where in some of the most impacted watersheds where 40% or 60% or 90% of the coho salmon are dying from this phenomena before they get a chance to reproduce, generally that would result in like localized extinction. Like the coho salmon just disappear from a certain watershed over like 10 to 30 year timescales.
Does the percentage go up if the city is denser? So like would Seattle have the worst morbidity numbers and then kind of maybe Tacoma would be second, and then as the cities get smaller, it would be less worse?
It seems to be like watershed specific. And again, that NOAA team published a great paper in 2018 that kind of did all this like watershed modeling where they looked at the observed rates of mortality in different watersheds and they correlated them to all these parameters like population and tree cover and how many roads there were, how much traffic there was. And in general, they found a pretty good correlation between like human intensity, like more people around, there was more of this issue. And the more impervious surfaces, right, the more kind of like concrete and pavement you had around, the worse the issue was. And the more traffic there was, the more busy roads were in the watershed, the higher the percentage of salmon died from the stormwater mortality. So there were definitely these correlations of like more people, more cars, more houses, more things, less salmon.
I wonder too if you said like the cement and the like asphalt and stuff, I wonder if that would channel the chemicals more and run them off more than say like a dirt and gravel road. I don't know, because maybe the dirt and gravel.
I mean, that's human settlements change hydrology, right? And one of the ways they change hydrology is like, out in the forest, the rain falls and it hits the ground and it soaks in. But on a city or a suburban community or a little town, that same rainfall hits the roof of your house and runs to the gutter and then maybe down your driveway onto the road, or it hits the road and ends up in the storm drainage system, which then like pumps it out to the nearest river or if you're on the coast, out into the ocean. And so that there's definitely a really clear pathway to like pick up chemicals from all kinds of sources along the way and discharge them to water. And so that definitely happens in cities.
I find our human ways of managing water is so fascinating. Like when you look thousands of years ago at the Roman aqueducts, and then I've been in the jungle, like Central American jungles, and seen the stonework through the mountains that they use for drainage, and it's pretty cool to see. And then my ancestors are Irish, so when they came to Canada in 1842, they settled on a pretty like kind of swampy area, and they had a clear fields, and they set up these canals. So they had 100-acre farms, and then they did canals all between the farms. And now that those are kind of gone, right? We don't farm as much. You can see some of them left. They're like little ditches. So you can barely see them at all, right? They've totally kind of returned to the natural landscape. But then people have some flooding issues, and there's water laying where you don't want it to lay. And so I find it fascinating that, I don't know, somehow back in the 1840s, the Irish knew how to channel the water properly so they could use it for animals, and they could use it to make sure their fields weren't flooded and that sort of thing. And it'd be interesting to see like the environmental impacts of that. But
we've had, humans as a whole over many, many thousands of years. Water is a big deal for us, just like, many, many other organisms, a huge deal. And so we definitely, move it to where we need it to be able to have water to drink, especially in dry areas. And then in wet areas, we often move it around to maybe grow crops or to water crops. That's definitely had some impacts on the organisms and watersheds, and, the way things would work if humans weren't around has definitely changed or is different.
Big time. Yeah. And especially I know the Pacific Northwest because I used to go to school at the University of Victoria. So I lived in BC for 13 years. So just above you in Tacoma. And there's a big movement, it seems, to remove dams from like the Oregon and Washington State area. I don't know if you've seen that happening, but I think that's pretty cool because sometimes nutrients can be blocked, right, from coming up the ocean. We always think of nutrients going downstream, but it sounds like nutrients can go upstream too, like through the food chain, right? I find that pretty neat.
Yeah, for sure. Dam removal changes hydrology, like natural systems are adapted to have floods happen. Salmon are, adapted to be able to swim way up into these tiny watersheds to reproduce and, create the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And dams have definitely altered that, both going up and coming down and change the temperature of the water and, what the chemistry of the water looks like and how nutrients move around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're definitely experimenting with dam removal in some watersheds for sure.
Yeah, it's neat to see for sure. And then Ian McAllister is a wolf researcher in BC, and I've went to his presentation before, and they talk about how the wolves and the bears actually use the salmon to like fertilize the forest. Because what you said with the salmon swimming upstream to those like, really high streams, those nutrients actually even get into the forest because the animals are fishing for them. So I think that's a neat natural process as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of amazing things out in the environment. And, speaking of, salmon, I should say it this way, trees are part salmon as well. And I know there was a UW study up in Alaska where I think they took the dead salmon after they spawn. Pacific salmon, they run up into the creeks and then they die after they reproduce. And that's what kind of fertilizes the next generation of young salmon. But it also fertilizes the forest. And I know there was some UW study up in Alaska where I think they took those dead salmon and they threw them all to one side of the creek. So they threw them for like decades. They threw them only on like the right side, the right bank of the creek or something like that. And the forest was like substantially healthier and like better on the side that they threw the salmon over to versus the other side.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I think there's some data out there that says that's more important than you might think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go back to your study a little bit because I'm not a scientist myself, but I did take some science in my undergrad, so I do have an inkling of what you scientists do. So if you want to explain it to me like I'm 5, tell me a little bit about the study. So you found 6-PPD, right? So that's the chemical that we're talking about that is hurting the fish. So can you tell us how you isolated that and what was that process?
Yeah. So, if science is nothing else, it's a process, right? Science is a process of like learning about a system, generating data to help you be able to predict or understand kind of what's going on. And so we started working in like the urban stormwater water quality, seeing what kind of chemicals were in the water when these mortality events were happening with the Coho salmon. And then I have an ecotoxicologist collaborator, Jen McIntyre. She's at Washington State University. And by 2017, Jen had shown that, Jen tested a whole bunch of different chemical sources to roadway runoff. It's like, if you think about a busy highway, right? It's not just little bits of tires that wear off your tires that are on that highway, but there's like a little bit of motor oil spills on the highway. There's some antifreeze. If a car overheats, that antifreeze gets there. A little bit of like windshield washer fluid, all these things like that. And so Jen figured out that it was only the tire rubber leachate, water that just touched these tire particles. That was the only source that was lethal to the Coho salmon. So once we kind of knew there was something toxic in the tire rubber bits themselves, we set on this like multi-year process of like manipulating the chemicals in there, like it's called fractionation, right? And in doing that, we learned more and more about what the chemical was. And, it took years of that to get to like this compound 6-PPD, which is a preservative in tires. And what we essentially figured out is that all tires need chemical preservatives in them. The same way that, food you buy in the store, lots of it has a preservative in it to make sure it stays good until you're ready to eat it. tires need a preservative so they last like 50,000 miles, and they're safe for people, and they're durable, and they're just like a really highly engineered product. And we figured out that this preservative chemical, the 6-PPD, when it reacts with ozone, it creates a molecule that's very toxic to the coho salmon. And that's essentially what our science process was. And it maybe sometimes it seems simple when you finally figure it out, but generally getting there takes a lot of hard work and time and effort. And I had a wonderful research team in my lab, and, many other people in, several labs helping to kind of like get us to understanding that it was this reaction of like 6-PPD and ozone, which created this toxic chemical.
So the actual thing that's killing the fish, really, you could say tire companies aren't putting that in their tires. They're putting something in their tires, and then that reaction with that to ozone, right? Is creating a new substance that is harmful to the fish.
Yeah. So a toxicologist would call 6-PPD a protoxicant, right? It's like a chemical parent of something that's the toxic, or the more highly toxic compound. And 6-PPD is actually in your tires to react with ozone. So, tires, along with many other rubbers, are really susceptible to this super trace concentration of ground level ozone. All of us breathe in a little bit of ozone, right? There's a tiny little concentration of ozone in the air near the ground. And if a tire doesn't have a preservative chemical, that ozone actually breaks apart the rubber molecules, and your tire will start to crack and become weaker. Like, so if you ever see something like old rubber is all cracked and like broken up, lots of that is from the ozone. And so 6-PPD is put in there because it reacts with the ozone faster than the ozone reacts with the rubber, right? It kind of protects the tire. It blocks the ozone from getting into the tire and breaking down those rubber bonds.
It sounds like somebody did a really good job finding this out. Like, it sounds like a really good invention, but then now we're finding out that it's really affecting the salmon, right?
Well, it's a necessary invention. Tires need these preservative chemicals in them. It's just a question of like which ones we use, right? And kind of like how much we put in there. There's actually other ones in there as well, right? There's a whole mixture of chemicals designed to make your tires durable and strong. And 6-PPD is just one of the more abundant ones, because that reaction with ozone is one of the more important, like, degradation or decay reactions for rubber tires.
Okay, so I want to ask a question that probably makes me sound stupid, but so I noticed in the study that it's called an antioxidant. Like, 6-PPD is an antioxidant, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that means it's preventing the oxidization, right?
Yeah, I mean, ozone's an oxidant, right? Ozone, lots of us are familiar with antioxidants kind of in terms of like human health or our bodies, right? We want to eat antioxidants so we don't get cancer, or, so we stay healthy.
But we don't want to eat 6-PPD. So what's that difference there? That's what I was wondering.
Well, it's just kind of like, our cells need different types of antioxidants because some of the chemistries are different. What antioxidants are in our cell is different than the ones like out in the air, right? So, and, we're not an engineered kind of like chemical product either, like the way a rubber product is. So lots of organisms, lots of products need antioxidants to prevent these like degradation reactions, these decay reactions. And it's even, lots of the preservatives in food are actually antioxidants. So your food doesn't oxidize and break down and, decay in like caloric value. So 6-PPD does the same thing for tires.
So what can we do about this? Is there any hope? Is there a way that we could replace 6-PPD with something else? Because we know it's so important for tires, or is there a way to like catch it or something? What can we do here?
Well, I mean, there's always hope. I'll start with that, right? So I think we have to start from this like foundation of good, strong hope. So I'm hopeful over time that we can figure out how to make tires that are like really safe for people, super durable, work great, get great gas mileage, last a long time. And at the same time, they're also safe for the environment. I think, we can definitely use our science tools. We can use our research capabilities to understand, hey, we have all these different chemicals that we can use as antioxidants. Which ones actually work the best to help protect that tire and are okay for fish and coho salmon? So I'm pretty hopeful we can actually kind of maybe understand what the possibilities are to help us make decisions about how we build our consumer products and what we build them out of. But even right now, even with the tires we have, we can also do a better job treating roadway runoff and stormwater runoff.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my instrument sees hundreds and thousands of chemicals in stormwater. So this stormwater is this super complex chemical mixture.
Mm-hmm.
It has sublethal impacts. You know, Jen McIntyre knows that it harms fish in multiple ways, even without killing them, right? It makes them, they don't grow as well.
Mm-hmm.
Their lateral line doesn't develop correctly. Their heart doesn't work correctly. And so things like stormwater treatment, which are already available, they actually protect aquatic organisms, not just coho salmon, but all the things that live in our waters from this like complex chemical mixture. And,
But these are so small. So there is stormwater filtration that will prevent such small, tiny chemicals. Because I know even sometimes, like in city drinking water, you can find a lot of little teeny tiny things that make it through that process, right?
yeah, there are many ways we have to treat chemicals, including, for example, in the case of stormwater, just passing that stormwater through dirt. I mean, that actually protects the coho salmon. That it totally keeps them safe because that dirt kind of soaks up lots of the toxic chemicals. It doesn't remove all of them, right? There's still some that go through the dirt. They don't really interact with like the soil at all, but a lot of other ones stick, and therefore that water gets cleaner. And it's the same thing if you were like, you mentioned you've visited a tropical area or you've been to the jungle, right? If there was some water you were concerned about drinking because it like didn't look good or didn't smell quite right, if you took that and like just passed it through soil, it would probably look a lot better. It might smell a lot better. It'd probably be less potential to like harm you or make you sick.
Mm-hmm.
And that type of treatment capability is well known to help water quality and fix a lot of pollution problems. So that works for stormwater as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the Pacific Northwest is such a beautiful, special area, and it can be quite crazy to go see how big the cities have gotten up there. Some of them are pretty big and really developed, right? And so I hope that we can develop, good places for humans to live that also allow us to have nature, do well too. It would be pretty amazing to have fish run up in the city and stuff like that. But it is quite a challenge for sure. So have you worked on any other related studies? Because this one, I just find this fascinating that you guys were able to find it. And like you said, sorry, before we get to the question, like you said, like you have hope. And I just want to say thank you for that, because I'm trying to focus on season 4 of the show on hope and not having this like doom and gloom, we're all going to perish attitude, because I don't think that's true. And I think we just all have to work, right? We have to put in the work to make the earth clean and reduce our emissions and this sort of thing. So I really like that you are hopeful as a scientist that we can, you identified a problem, you found out what it was, and maybe we can solve it, right? Even if it's just with some dirt. Sometimes the solutions can be pretty simple, right? I think that's amazing. But so back to the question, are you working on any other related studies?
Yeah. So, anytime you find a chemical that kind of nobody's been working on or nobody's been paying attention to before, there's always a lot of work to do, right? So we need to understand kind of like where this chemical occurs in the environment, how much of it is there, like how quickly it degrades away, how we can best operate a treatment system to remove it and kind of keep that water clean. So we have all these follow-up type studies to do on this toxic chemical. My lab, and I know other labs globally, will be busy with that in the coming years. And, we're not going to get answers right away. Science always takes time to do, but we're going to figure out all those types of things. And I'm sure at the same time, people will start looking at other species of fish and kind of see how they're impacted and understand like how this toxic chemical works. We've also too been interested in thinking about like, actually when we're done using tires, lots of our tire is still there. And so tire recycling and kind of what we do with these tires when we're done with them on our cars is actually a big problem for people globally. And for example, many of us might have played on playgrounds filled with those little crumb rubber bits, which are like recycled tire pieces. And so we also want to try and understand like how those crumb rubber playing fields, like if some of these toxic chemicals are there and kind of what's happening in that kind of system as well as I think just understanding like all these chemicals that we see in roadway runoff that nobody really knows what they are. There's just a lot of work needed to do to just understand what's there.
Absolutely. I also think back to, I used to sail around the San Juan Islands when I was in BC, and I'm just thinking of all the tires I saw on the sides of boats and on the sides of docks too, right? So tires are typically used on jetties to prevent like boat damage as you're coming alongside, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if that has...
Yeah, I mean, that, you know, the reuse and recycling of tires, there are many ways it's done, you know, like everybody knows it's probably a bad idea just to like use that tire and you buy a 20-pound tire and then you use up like a pound or two of it when you drive on it and then you throw it away into the landfill. And so people are trying to like chop up those tires and put them into roadways, like to mix them into the asphalt. There's tires that are recycled even into stormwater treatment systems. So they're actually like passing stormwater through them to remove metals that kind of stick to the rubber.
So they're removing metals, but adding the 6 ppd probably. I
think they probably are.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's issues like that we got to figure out and kind of work on. We're chopping the tires up into those like crumb rubber playing fields, and then there are places like, I know places in Seattle where, you know, they took all these tires and they literally made like retaining walls on the river, or these like, you know, they use the tires to make like walls in the river to help with flood control and erosion, right? So they're like, you know, basically putting tens or hundreds of tires into the water kind of to help stabilize the bank. But that, of course, you know, you kind of make like a tire rubber tee just downstream from that. And that, yeah, we just need to understand what's in that a little better.
That's crazy. Like I find too, sometimes when we try to help, sometimes we can make things worse. So if ever I try to jump on a bandwagon to like protest something or whatever, right? I'm always like, you know, am I really on the right side of things here? I always ask myself that just to make sure, right? Because sometimes good intentions have bad consequences sometimes that you just don't know about, right, later. But the last question I had for you, Ed, was what got you interested in rivers and salmon and that sort of thing?
Well, I grew up in New Hampshire, so I'm from New England. And my grandfathers both love being outside. They both love going fishing, and lots of people in my family just kind of went fishing. So I kind of grew up fishing with my grandfathers and spending time on the water, and, you know, just love being out there, love the outdoors, love those fish. And I was good at math and chemistry. So I kind of took this track of understanding what chemicals are out in the environment and how I might be able to help problem solve as an engineer, you know, to maybe hopefully fix some of these problems we've created, often accidentally and unintentionally, out in the environment that are harming fish like salmon.
Awesome. Well, thank you for this. Thank you for all the work that you do. This has been an amazing conversation, and I hope that we do figure out the best thing to do with tires. So thank you very much, Ed.
Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. That was Ed Kolodziej. He's the associate professor at the University of Washington in Tacoma at the Center for Urban Waters. Just want to give a big thanks to the show's current sponsor, Due South. That's DEW, dewsouth.ca. It's an online shop where you can find all your zero waste needs.
Change starts now.
This is the Zero Waste Countdown Podcast.